again, as we mentioned out there in the field, if that structure is supporting a tremendous amount of weight, and if that structure catches on fire and the integrity of that structure now is compromised, and there's any sudden shifts of the equipment that it's holding, that then can create that voltage, right, to ground, to create the voltage gradient. It also, those sudden shifts in those structures can cause the conductors carrying the electricity to make contact with one another, and as a result of that, it will create a circuit lockout. So each one of those circuits is feeding people, right? It's feeding communities, businesses, homes, street lights. That now there will be no electricity there. So that in itself creates hazards for the community that current is providing resources for. Then there is the fact that if those structures burn down and if it's close to a fence and those conductors, the wire, will lay down and lay on those fences can be energized. That creates a hazard not just for the farmers and ranchers going through gates that are making contact with it, but potentially first responders who may be responding to an out-of-control fire as they're cutting through fences and going through gates. It also poses a risk to wildlife, obviously touching that, because if it's energized, there's the potential for electrocution or certainly severe damage to the body. The other hazard of that is, again, that carbon flume that we talked about. So those are really the big serious hazards that are associated with burning around, or if those structures catch on fire. Yes, that goes back to the carbon flume. We've actually had departments that have been fighting fire lines in proximity to power poles. The fire has already burnt structures down, so those lines are down now. But we actually have video of carbon going phase to phase. When it happens, it's going to be very loud and obnoxious. All right, but man, if you're ever in that situation, run the opposite direction because you're in that hazard zone.
We actually had a situation last year where a landowner it was more like a lot in an urban setting, maybe 1.5 acres, 2 acres, that he burned, and it was basically in Evergy's right of way under a 230 kV line, which is 230,000 volts, and the line operated, or that carbon flume operated the line. So it's not just on a big fire that can happen. It can happen on a small fire too, like this one. Yeah, as far as the heat affecting the power line or the power poles, typically on a controlled burn, or even if it was an out of control burn, we don't worry too much about the heat on that situation. Now, if somebody put a brush pile underneath of the line and then burned it, then we have an issue, because then we have sustained heat there for a long time. But typically, as you're burning under a power line, it's going to burn through there fast enough that's not going to be a hazard. We don't want to have a sustained fire, though, that's going to last for several minutes under a power line. Then we have a safety hazard.
Yeah, have they ever started? Yeah, I mean, we've seen some stuff fail, throw sparks on the ground. Matter of fact, in that pole yard we had, we were just in, lightning kind of started it, and we didn't even know it till 5 or 6 hours later when it finally exposed itself. It had started in the middle of the pole and finally exposed itself, and the top 8 feet of that pole flipped over. And the only way that we knew it is we found the grass fire that was radiating out from around it. We thought we just had a grass fire. Then once we got out there and started looking around, it was actually a lightning strike from a morning storm that came through and ended up burning through that pole and threw some embers on the ground. But Nick can probably talk a little bit more. But we have a fault or a failure or something like that, and yeah, I mean, any kind of heat source around that could start it.
We try to, we've got several maintenance programs in place and inspections, so we try to be pretty proactive that stuff doesn't happen. But where we're dealing with Mother Nature daily, that's hard to control. So we do what we can to mitigate it.
Yeah, and I think too, some of the things that folks don't realize, a lot of our circuits have protective devices on them, and they're designed that if there is a fault or if a line, goes to fault, that the fuses on that circuit will open up, or the breaker at the substation will recognize that fault because there's a huge spike in amps, and so it'll trip, right? But it is what it is. It's equipment, and many times equipment fails. So we have scenario after scenario to share with you where lines have hit the ground, and as a result of the fuse not blowing on the circuit and the breaker looking at that fault as additional load, will continue to feed it. And as a result of it, it may snake or it may just sit there and spark, but as a result, it starts fires. And so, again, just like we tell the general public, if you see a wire down on the ground, stay away from it, because even though it's not jumping around, doesn't mean it's not energized.
Wildlife as well, they get into it, and the hair or the feathers on them catch on fire. They drop at the base of the pole and can start a fire that way too.
I think that the best way to describe that is that if you do not have the resources to start fighting that fire, you obviously need to dial 911 and get the right agencies responding. But if you see that fire line approaching any type of structures, overhead power lines and structures, we have to remember that carbon flume. It can be very dangerous. Again, carbon conducts, and if the smoke is thick enough, it will arc phase to ground. And when that happens, it'll happen in a blink of an eye. And if you're in proximity to that, it can cause serious injuries and even fatality. And again, another thing to remind people of is if the structure is on fire, they're not going to save the structure, right? So essentially is don't put themselves in harm's way. Let the professionals deal with that. But stay at least 100 feet away from those structures, and that has to do, again, if there's any compromise on the structure, that current flow or that voltage, and voltage is pressure, will be emitting through the ground, and that's that voltage gradient. And for transmission voltages, and that's really anything above 34,000 volts, that's going to go out a significant distance. So at least 100 feet, they need to stay clear of those lines and those structures.
I think a little prevention as far as burning around power lines goes a long way, because if not, very easily turn into fatality.
Yeah, that's one thing. Electricity is very unforgiving. It does some amazing things to the body. It does some amazing things to things in the area, trees and other things that it comes in contact with. It is vicious, and it's the reality is that on that kind of voltage that we were talking about and showing you out there, if you come into contact with that, it's not very good. It's unsurvivable.
A lot of that can depend on the structure, So on our Evergy property, the highest voltage we got is 345. So a 345 structure is $65,000-$70,000 to replace it. Now if it's a single phase distribution pole, we would be down to $4,000 or $5,000 to replace it. So a lot of it just depends on the structure and the voltage.
I do think that the cost of not just the structures, the cost of those types of events goes even further. Because like I said, if those circuits lock out, that supply for livelihoods, for businesses, for homes, people working at home, that's lost production. And even though, like I said, we can move things around and get things switched over to pick up that load, that takes time. And so again, not only do you have the hazards associated with all of that from a safety perspective, but just the lost production of that one event can be extremely costly.
And I'll add to that too, you know, we talk about the safety of our employees. So in order to have an event, you have to have an exposure. So if we burn down a power line and, like Tim said, locked out a circuit, shut down a town, you know, our guys are going out there, hey, we need to get power restored. So now we're sending them out into an environment where we have damaged infrastructure out there for them to perform their job. So like I said, in order for you to have an injury or an event, you have to have an exposure, and that's just an exposure that we could have been prevented by doing the proper prevention techniques.
Yeah, that's what else I heard. Very good point.
Who ends up paying for a pull if a structure's burned off? I'll take that one, you know, and it's a little bit of a gray area if a landowner or farmer rancher, if they burned one off and if they did their due diligence to try to prevent it and something happened that was out of their control, and if they've included us as far as hey, does this look okay? Or perhaps it burned up overnight. They burnt the pasture the day before. They go out there the next day. They've seen the structure's been burnt quite a bit, and they call and let us know about it and work with us on it. We're going to work with them on it. Now, if it's just completely done out of neglect, or you know, I hate to use the word spite, but
Or repeat offenders.
or repeat offenders,
People that
yeah.
just simply don't care.
Yep. We've got landowners that have burned up several, you know, year after year. So everyone gets handled a little bit different. A first-time offender and doing your due diligence to take some precautions around the power line. We want to work with you. You know, I mean, that's burning in a lot of operations is pretty crucial, big part of their operation that needs to be done. So we want to respect that too. Should you report to Evergy if you've got any, if you're going to do a prescribed burn? If you got any questions or concerns about it, I guess I would err in caution and go ahead and get a hold of us.
And there's different rules for different counties. You know, Shawnee County is a little different than Potawatomi County. You know, they'll issue a burn permit for an annual basis, and then you just basically call dispatch and say, you know, my name's Aaron Priest. I'm going to be burning 80 acres west of Duluth or whatever town you're living in, and notify them that way. But I think back to Nick's point, you know, if you do have concerns, you go out there and you do got a lot of fuel load around it. You know, maybe there is some cedars or something like that's inside that or underneath that power line that if it really gets up could burn our conductor down or make it bag down enough that it touches, you know, a difference of potential, and we get into a situation like that. I think you can err on the side of caution, like you said, and call. And you know, Nick, he travels around. We got local supervision out there that can come out there and look at it and see if we can come to a resolution of what we need to do to help you out, just to help you and save our infrastructure.
Yeah, we don't want to come across as Evergy like if you have a power line across your property that we don't want you to burn. Evergy understands that that's a significant part of operating. So we just want to work with you on burning that. It doesn't mean you can or that we discourage it. We just want to make sure that everyone knows the precautions to be safe about it and just do it correctly.
Yeah, and I think for Evergy too, the big picture more than anything is safety, right? We don't want the landowner to get injured. We don't want our first responders to get injured. We don't want wildlife or cattle, because it affects them all. And so we really just want them to be safe. Aaron?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. You know, we talk about, you know, when we're out there and looking at the poles and prevention techniques. You know, that's a big. I'm a prevention person, right? If we can knock it in the head before we ever have a problem, that's the way to do it. And taking just 10 minutes to go out there and prep that site before you burn around our infrastructure goes a long way in that prevention phase, and keeping the safety aspect in check, and keeping the financial repercussions in check. I think just that little bit of prevention, the techniques that we showed you today are a great example of that, and I hope you take those back and use them on your operation.